All right, today we're talking about place value, decimal places, and rounding. And I know I'm going to get a great big groan when you hear that topic because you feel like you've been doing this topic and learning this forever. And that's because you have. You have been visiting and using these skills since elementary school, early elementary school. Man, place value, that's like first grade, second grade stuff. But there's a reason why we're covering it in this class, and it's because it is the number one it's the number one reason that students miss a question on college exams, college entrance exams, tests like, kind of like the ACT, but there's smaller versions of that. Colleges have their own version of it. The Utah Tech, Dixie Tech, both have their own versions of it. But on these tests, this is a skill that for some reason you guys still suck at. Like you've been doing this forever, and it's still difficult for you. So we're doing it again, and hopefully you'll get a little bit better this time. And if you take Math 1030 next year, or you're trying to get into Dixie Tech and questions come up that involve this, you won't be as embarrassed that you're still trying to solve problems you've been doing since elementary school, right? So, decimal places. You're going to hear me use this phrase a lot in our class. I will tell you to round to 3 decimal places or to round to 1 decimal place. So what we mean when we say decimal places is just the number of decimals the number of numbers that come after the decimal, right? So you've got this number, 1.245. This is called the decimal point. The number of decimal places is the number, how many numbers come after that point. So 1, 2, 3 decimal places. If you have a great big long number, 1.6789425, and you're asked to work with 2 decimal places, well, there's 1 decimal place, there's 2 decimal places. So you're just counting how many numbers come after the decimal. That gives you the number of decimal places. We're going to use that a lot in this classroom. Place value. Again, one of those I know you've covered a lot, but it's one that we mix up quite a bit. So the place values to the left of the decimal. These are the ones that you're pretty good at, right? You've got, where's my little laser here? The first number to the left of the decimal, those are how many ones you have. Then you've got how many tens you have. So the number 83 has 8 tens and 3 ones. It's like you're counting money in your pocket. You've got 8 $10 bills and 3 $1 bills. After the tens, you get the 100 place value. Then you get the thousands, then you get the 10,000s, and then the 100,000s. It goes up and up and up. Place value going to the right is a little bit different. The words are a lot similar, except we don't start with ones. We start with something called tenths. So tenths and tens are pretty similar in that they both start with 10, but to the right of the decimal, you put a TH at the end. To the left of the decimal, you just put an S. So first place value to the right are called the tenths, and then the hundredths, and then the thousandths, and then the next one would be the 10,000ths, and then you would have 100,000ths, and it keeps going up and up. We won't get really far. In this class, I'm more interested in number of decimals that make sense. When we're using money, we're going to be going to 2 decimal places all the time because when you're counting money, you deal with dollars and cents come in 2 decimal places. There's not a lot of reason to go much past that unless you are doing very precise calculations or you are writing numbers, great big numbers in a different format like scientific notation or something like that. So we usually use the smaller ones in this class, but we got to make sure you understand what it means to use the other ones. So, couple examples here on the right. Standard form is what we call it when the number is just the number. Word form is what you call it when you write it in words. So 1.4 is the standard form. In words, you replace that point, that decimal, with the word and. So you just read the number, but instead of saying point, you say and. So 1 and 4 tenths. 2.07, when you would write that or say that, we will say 2.07 in class a lot, but technically the correct way to say it is 2. Whoops, let's zoom in here a little bit. You say 2 and, now you've got this 0 and then a 7. So you just say 7, but the place value of that 7 is the hundredths. So you don't just say sevenths or 7 tenths because there's no tenths. There's 7 hundredths. Standard form for number 3, 14.009. In words, 14. And we don't say 009. We say 9. And we look at that last place value, thousandths. So you just write the word that goes with the last place value. When you're going to the right, you don't have to say every place value along the way. For example, if I have 16.329, I don't say 16 and 3 tenths, 2 hundredths, 9 thousandths. I say 16 and 329 thousandths. So you read it, but you only use the last place value. So write the decimal in word form. So 182.1. So you write this kind of like you're writing a check. 182. And the only time you use the word and is where the decimal is. So 182 and 1 tenth, because it ends in the 10th place. 27.35, you would write 27 and 35. And then you look at where that number ends, the place value. It ends in the hundredths, so you would say hundredths. All right, write in standard form, 5,749, so 5749, and that means a decimal, 1 tenth. So I'm going to put a 1 in the tenths place. 918, so 918, and 57 thousandths. This is, you got to be a little bit careful because if you just write 57 after, you're ending in the hundredths place. You want to end in the thousandths place, so you've got to put a 0 and then the 57, so you end in the right place. Write the time in words. We just practiced that, so we're going to go a little bit quick. 8.53 seconds. You are going to say 8. That's not a word. Wow. Long day. You are going to say 8 and 53. And then what's that place value? It's the hundredths. You would say 53 hundredths seconds because those are our units that we're using. We're using the units seconds. 11.68. 11. Instead of saying point, you say and. The 68, you just write 68. And then again, you write where you end. You ended in the hundredths place. And the units we're measuring are seconds. If these were a distance, you might use feet or meters or something else. Write the number using words, and then write it using, and then write the number of decimal places. We've practiced a lot of these in class. We're going to do more of these. On the video, I'm not. I don't want you to sit and listen to more of this. You've got practice. You can try those ones on your own. I want to move on to the rounding section of this one, all right? So rounding, again, it's kind of the big reason why we're having this conversation today. It hurts you on a lot of placement tests. So let's review, try to get off to a good start this year. So to round a number, step one, you first decide the last digit that you're going to keep. So if it tells you to round to 2 decimal places, the second decimal place is the last one you're going to keep. If it says round to the nearest thousandth, then you're going to go to the thousandth, and that's the last decimal you're going to keep. If it says to round to the nearest hundred, you go to the hundred place and look at that number. That's the last digit you're going to keep. That's not the number that you're most concerned with. The number you're most concerned with is step 2. You look at the next digit. You look at the digit to the right. And that's what makes you decide if you leave your number the same or you round it up. So if the number is a 4 or smaller, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you drop it. You round, you leave the digit the same. If you have a number that's bigger than 5 or is the number 5, so 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then you're going to round your last digit up. It's going to increase by 1, and of course, if it was a 9, it increases to 0, and the next one increases by 1, and so on and so forth. So let's do some examples. Write down these numbers correctly to 2 decimal places. So example 1A, I'm going 2 decimal places. So this is where I'm going to end. But I don't look at that number. I look at the number to the right, the number 4. Well, 4 is smaller than 5. So that tells me that when these numbers go away, that 3 is not going to get bumped up. It is going to stay a 3. So when I round this, I say 1.33. Okay, B, 0.01697, 2 decimal places. That's the number 1 right here. I look to the right. It's a 6. A 6 is 5 or bigger. So when these numbers go away, I'm rounding that 1 up and changing it to a 2. So I end up with 0.02. All right, I think there's a C. There it is. 22.354999. All right, 2 decimal places is the number 5 right here. I look to the right at the 4. I put this example in here because it doesn't matter what comes after the 4. Sometimes you guys see these 9s and you want to like bump everything up. Nope, we're going to end with at the 5. So I look at only the next number, only the number 4. These don't even matter. Well, 4 is less than 5. So that means when that 4 goes away, the 5 is going to stay a 5. 22.35 would be my correct rounding. Okay, part number 2, A. 2436666.5. It wants me to write down these numbers correct to the thousandths place. So the thousandth, if you remember, that's the third number after the decimal. Well, when I look at this number that it wants me to round, there is no number that goes that far. It ends at 5. So I can go ahead and write down 2436666.5. I'm not going to put anything after the 5 because I didn't round. There's no numbers that came after the 5. So I'm going to end right there with a 5. Okay. Now that brings us to a conversation that we need to have. I wish you were in class with me having this in person. It might make a little bit more sense, but we're going to make an attempt right here. Rounding matters. It matters when you keep the number 0 and when you drop the number 0. Sometimes you guys see a couple of numbers. Well, let's write a couple numbers so that we're talking about something you can see. So I'm going to write down 3 numbers, 1.5, and then I'm going to write down 1.53, and then I'm going to write down 1.50001. So I've got 3 different numbers. Now, if I want to round these, I'm going to round these to 1 decimal place, okay? Well, that first number, that 1.5, one decimal place is the 5, so that stays 1.5. Okay. The second number, 1.53. So I look to the right of the 5. So here's my first decimal place. I look to the right. It's a 3. That's smaller than 5, so I'm going to round, but I'm going to leave that 5 a 5. So it's going to become 1.5. Now, right now, these numbers look exactly the same because we rounded to 1.5. Even this next one, if I round it, if I look at the number that comes after the 5, I have a 0. So that means I don't have to round the 5. I just get 1.5. So when I round to one decimal place, I get the same number 3 times. But I didn't start with the same number. I started with 3 very different numbers. But when I rounded, it makes it look like they're all the same. Sometimes that's not a big deal. Sometimes it's a very big deal. So let's look at what happens if I round to, let's go 2 decimal places. So instead of 1 decimal place, let's go 2. So when I take 1.5 and I round it to 2 decimal places, there's not even a second decimal. So I can just write 1.5. Now when I take 1.53 and I round it to 2 decimal places, the second decimal place is the 3. There's nothing after the 3, so I just write 1.53. So at 2 decimal places, now I can see, oh, you know what? Those first 2 numbers aren't the same. When I rounded to 1 decimal place, it made it look like they were the same. When I go 2 decimal places, they don't look the same. Now here's the one that we've got to be really careful with. The third number, 1.50001, 2 decimal places. That's this 0. So that's the number I want to keep or move up. So I look to the right and I got a 0. That's smaller than the number 4. So that means I need to keep this 0. So when I write down my rounding, I write 1.50. That's different than the first 1.5. These two 1.5s, mathematically, they're equivalent, but they tell the reader a very different thing. This 1.5 says there was nothing after the 5. This 1.50 tells the person looking at the number there were other numbers that came after that, but we rounded them away and it just ended with a 0. So when you're asked to round to 2 decimal places and it ends in a 0, you've got to put that 0 there. It tells the reader that there was more numbers that came after it. It tells the reader that this number and this number were not the same to begin with, okay? Let's go one more place. Let's round, let's go 3 decimal places. Let's do one more. So if I take this 1.5, round it 3 decimal places, it's still 1.5. If I take the 1.53 and I round it 3 decimal places, it's 1.53. There's nothing that comes after the 3, so I'm not going to add a 0. There was nothing there. There wasn't a number. There was nothing rounded. It can stay 1.53. Now my 1.500, this is the number I'm rounding to. I look to the right. It's a 0, so I'm going to keep that 0 a 0. And I end up with 1.500. Again, these are very different numbers. This number right here and this number right here and this one, you can tell they aren't the same thing. And that 0 tells you that there was something else that came later and it got rounded away. If I was building a building and I needed this measurement, that tells me there are some really small numbers out here somewhere, but I rounded them away and I ended up with 1.500. All right, that's different than saying I measured exactly 1.5. This is not exactly 1.5. It's rounded to 1.5, but it's not exactly 1.5. So be really careful with that moving forward in this class and any others. All right, so thousandths. Let's go back to the homework. Our thousandths place is this 0. I look to the right and I have a 3. 3 tells me not to round up. It tells me to keep it a 0. You want to just write 0 as your answer because there's no numbers left. They're all zeros. But we rounded to that third decimal place, so I've got to put 0, 0 after. It looks weird. It looks like this number, 0, and this number, technically, those are the same. But this one is not actually 0. There were other numbers that came after it. We rounded it to 0 based on this value, but it's not actually 0. There is something there, all right? So we can't put just plain 0. You got to put the 0.000. Okay, 99.9999. We look at the third place, which is a 9. You look to the right. That's a 9, which makes this round up. So this 9 becomes a 0. And instead of rounding that, we round the next one. Well, that's a 9 too, so it becomes a 0. Now we have to round the next 9 up. It becomes a 0. I've got a decimal. I've got to round this 9 up. It becomes a 0. So I round this 9 up. It becomes a 0. And there's nothing to the left of it. Technically, there's a 0 right here. So that becomes our 1. So we get 100.000. We do not get 100. We don't have exactly 100. We have 100.000. That tells the reader that you rounded these numbers to get exactly 100. But your number, your value is not exactly 100. So please don't write this one. Write it with the correct rounding rules. Okay, time is yours. You got a worksheet to do. Get that done. If you have questions about rounding, I know this is one you've been playing with for a long time. If you need more help with it, please come and get it.